Welcome to our channel, where we explore the darkest corners of the human psyche. Today, we journey into the twisted mind of the UK's most notorious serial killers. From the urban jungles of London to the industrial wastelands of the north, we will witness the bleak landscapes that gave birth to the most depraved individuals in British history. Join us as we explore the twisted minds of these monsters and the bleak landscapes that shaped their actions. From the infamous Jack the Ripper to the Yorkshire Ripper, we will uncover the gruesome details of their crimes and delve into the psyche of these sadistic individuals. 1. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, was a British general practitioner who is believed to have killed over 250 of his patients between 1975 and 1998. He was born in Nottinghamshire, England in 1946 and graduated from Leeds School of Medicine in 1970. Shipman began his career as a GP in Todmorden, West Yorkshire, where he quickly gained a reputation for being a dedicated and caring doctor. However, in 1975, he was convicted of forging prescriptions in order to obtain drugs for himself and was struck off the medical register for a year. He eventually returned to practice in 1977 in Hyde, Greater Manchester. In 1998, Shipman was arrested and charged with the murder of 15 of his patients. He was convicted of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery in 2000 and was sentenced to life in prison. However, an inquiry into his crimes, led by Dame Janet Smith, revealed that the true number of Shipman's victims was likely over 250. The inquiry found that Shipman had targeted mostly elderly women and had used lethal injections of diamorphine to kill them. Shipman was widely condemned for his actions, and his case is considered one of the worst cases of serial killing in British history. He died in prison in 2004 while serving his sentence. 2. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, commonly known as the Moors murderers, were a British serial killer couple who killed 5 children between 1963 and 1965. Ian Brady was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1938, and Myra Hindley was born in Manchester, England in 1942. They met in 1961 while working at the same company in Manchester. They began dating and soon became inseparable. In 1963, the couple began committing a series of murders, targeting children and teenagers in and around Manchester. Their victims were John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. The 5th victim, Pauline Reed, was Hindley's own niece. The victims were sexually assaulted, tortured, and murdered. In 1965, the police were tipped off about the couple and they were arrested and charged with the murders of John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey. Hindley's brother-in-law David Smith was the one who tipped off the police. They were both found guilty and were sentenced to life in prison. In 1987, Hindley admitted her involvement in the killings of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett and provided information that led to the discovery of Bennett's body. Despite her attempts at parole, Hindley remained in prison until her death in 2002. Brady was declared criminally insane in 1985 and was transferred to a high-security psychiatric hospital where he remained until his death in 2017. The Moors murders case is considered one of the most notorious criminal cases in British history, and the couple's actions were widely condemned. 3. Peter Sutcliffe. Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was a British serial killer who murdered 13 women and attempted to kill 7 more between 1975 and 1980. He was born in Bingley, West Yorkshire, England in 1946 and worked as a lorry driver and gravedigger. Sutcliffe began his killing spree in 1975, targeting women who were prostitutes or who he believed to be prostitutes. He would stalk his victims and then attack them with a hammer or a knife. His victims were found in various locations in northern England, with the majority of them being in the West Yorkshire area. In 1977, the police received a letter and an audio cassette from someone claiming to be the killer, who called himself Jack the Ripper. The police initially dismissed the letter, but later realized that the handwriting matched that of Sutcliffe's. Sutcliffe was finally arrested in 1981 after being caught with a prostitute in his car. He was charged with 13 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. In May 1981, he was found guilty and sentenced to 20 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment. Sutcliffe's case was one of the most high-profile criminal cases in British history, and his actions were widely condemned. He is currently serving his sentence in a high-security prison and has been denied parole multiple times. Levi Belfield. Levi Belfield, also known as the bus stop stalker, is a British serial killer who was convicted of murdering 3 women as well as the attempted murder of another. He was born in London, England in 1968 and had a history of violence and criminal behavior. Belfield's first known murder was in 2002 when he killed Marcia McDonnell, a 19-year-old girl who was hit with a hammer while waiting for a bus. In 2004, he killed Amélie de Lagrange, a 22-year-old French student who was hit with a hammer while walking home. And in 2010, he killed Millie Dowler, a 13-year-old girl who was abducted on her way home from school. Belfield was arrested in 2008 and was charged with the murders of McDonnell and de Lagrange, as well as the attempted murder of another woman. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison in 2008. He was also convicted of Dowler's murder in 2011 and was given a whole life order. Belfield's actions were widely condemned, and his case is considered one of the most high-profile criminal cases in recent British history. He is currently serving his sentence in a high-security prison. 5. Dennis Nilsen. Dennis Nilsen, also known as the Muswell Hill Murderer, was a British serial killer who murdered at least 12 men and boys between 1978 and 1983. He was born in Fraserburgh, Scotland in 1945 and served in the British Army before becoming a police officer and later a civil servant. Nilsen's killing spree began in 1978 when he killed his first known victim, a young man he had met in a bar. He would lure men and boys, mostly homeless and gay, to his apartment in North London, where he would kill them by strangling or drowning them. He would then keep their corpses for extended periods of time, often performing acts of necrophilia on them before disposing of their remains. In 1983, Nilsen was arrested after a plumber discovered human remains blocking the drain of his apartment building. When police searched his apartment, they found more remains and evidence linking him to the murders. He was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison in 1983. Nilsen's case is considered one of the most notorious serial killings in British history, and his actions were widely condemned. He died in prison in 2018 while serving his sentence. 6. Robert Black. Robert Black was a Scottish serial killer and pedophile who was convicted of murdering 4 young girls between 1981 and 1986. He was born in 1947 in Falkirk, Scotland, and spent much of his early life in care homes and juvenile detention centers. He later worked as a delivery driver and took advantage of his job to travel around UK and Europe. Black's first known murder was in 1981 when he abducted and killed 9-year-old Jennifer Carty in Northern Ireland. In 1983, he abducted and killed 11-year-old Susan Maxwell in the Scottish Borders. In 1986, he killed Caroline Hogg, a 5-year-old girl in Portobello, Edinburgh, and Sarah Harper, a 10-year-old girl in Morley, near Leeds. Black was finally caught in 1990 when he was seen abducting a 6-year-old girl in the Scottish village of Stowe. The girl managed to escape and Black was arrested. The police found evidence linking him to the previous murders, and he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of the 4 girls. Black's case is considered one of the most heinous serial killings in British history. His actions were widely condemned. He died in prison in 2016 while serving his sentence. 7. John Christie. John Christie was a British serial killer who murdered at least 8 women, including his wife, between 1943 and 1953. He was born in 1899 in Halifax, West Yorkshire, England, and served in the British Army during World War I. After the war, he worked as a clerk and later as a special constable. Christie's killings began in 1943 when he killed his wife Ethel. He strangled her and hid her body in the garden of their home in London's Notting Hill neighborhood. He then buried her body under the floorboards of the same house. He killed several other women and buried them in the same garden. Christie's killing spree went unnoticed for years, but in 1953, the police were tipped off about the smell coming from the garden of his home. When they searched the property, they found the remains of several women, including his wife. Christie was arrested and charged with the murders. He was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1953. He was hanged in 1953 at Pentonville Prison. Christie's case is considered one of the most heinous serial killings in British history, and his actions were widely condemned. He remains one of the most notorious serial killers in British history, known for his manipulation and control over his victims. 8. The Ipswich Ripper. The Ipswich Ripper is the nickname given to Steve Wright, a British serial killer who murdered 5 women working as prostitutes in Ipswich, England in 2006. He was born in London, England in 1958 and later moved to Ipswich, where he worked as a forklift truck driver. Wright's killing spree began in 2006 when he killed his first known victim, 25-year-old Gemma Adams. He then killed Tanya Nicol, 19, Annalie Alderton, 24, Paula Clennell, 24, and Annette Nichols, 29. All of the victims were found in a similar area near the River Orwell, and all had been strangled. Wright was arrested on December 19, 2006 and charged with the murders. He was found guilty in 2008 and was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order. The Ipswich Ripper case was one of the biggest criminal investigations in recent British history, and his actions were widely condemned. Steve Wright remains in prison and is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in recent British history. 9. Fred and Rose West. Fred and Rose West were a British serial killer couple who were responsible for the deaths of at least 12 young women and girls, including some of their own children, between 1967 and 1987. They were born in 1941 and 1953 respectively and met in their early 20s. The Wests began their killing spree in 1967 when they killed their first known victim, Charmaine West, Fred's 8-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. They buried her body in the garden of their home in Cromwell Street, Gloucester. Over the next 20 years, they killed at least 11 more young women and girls, including Fred West's daughter Heather and Rose West's daughter Charmaine. The victims were mainly young women and girls, many of whom were in vulnerable situations and known to the couple. They buried the bodies in and around the house, in the garden, and under the patio. In 1994, Fred West was arrested and charged with 12 counts of murder, and Rose West was charged with 10 counts of murder. Fred West hanged himself in prison while awaiting trial, and Rose West was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison in 1995. The West's case is considered one of the most heinous serial killings in British history, and their actions were widely condemned. The case attracted significant media attention, and the investigation and trial were considered one of the most complex and longest in British legal history. 10. The Whitechapel Killer. The Whitechapel Killer, also known as Jack the Ripper, was a serial killer who killed at least 5 women in the Whitechapel district of London, England in 1888. The identity of the killer remains unknown, and the case is one of the most famous unsolved criminal cases in history. The killings began in August 1888 when the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found in Whitechapel. Over the next few months, 4 more women were killed in a similar manner, and their bodies were found in the same area. The victims were all prostitutes and were killed by throat slitting and mutilation. The police were unable to identify the killer, and despite a large-scale investigation, no one was ever arrested or charged with the murders. The case became a sensation in the press, and the killer was given the nickname Jack the Ripper by the newspapers. The case remains one of the most famous unsolved criminal cases in history, and the identity of the Waitekapel killer remains a mystery. Despite numerous theories, investigations, books, and movies, the identity of the killer remains unknown. Thanks for watching our video on the history of some of the UK's most notorious serial killers. We hope you found it informative and interesting. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button to stay updated on our latest content. We have many more true crime videos in the pipeline, and you don't want to miss out. And if you have any suggestions or topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.